a new beginning. When we moved into our new home, everything seemed perfect. The two-story Victorian house had a certain charm: white paneling, a wraparound porch, and large bay windows. It was old, but well kept. It was supposed to be a fresh start for my wife, Emily, and our 6-year-old daughter, Sophie. We were ready to leave behind the stress of the city and start over in this quiet, picturesque town. At first, everything was normal. Sophie loved the new house, especially her spacious bedroom. She spent hours playing with her stuffed animals, making up little stories and drawing pictures. Then, about 2 weeks in, something changed. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me with those big blue eyes and said, "Daddy, can Max sleep over tonight?" I frowned. "Max? Who's Max?" She giggled. "My new friend. He lives in my room." A chill ran down my spine. Max. At first, I brushed it off. Kids have imaginary friends all the time. Emily thought it was cute. "It's just her way of adjusting," she said. "It'll pass." But it didn't. Over the next few weeks, Sophie talked about Max constantly. She saved a spot for him at the dinner table. She whispered to him before bedtime. She even asked me to buy him a toothbrush. I humored her. It seemed harmless. But then, things started getting weird. One night, I heard footsteps in her room. Light pitter-patters, like a child running around. When I peeked in, Sophie was fast asleep. And her dolls, they were lined up perfectly, facing the closet. The next morning, I asked her about it. She just shrugged. "Max did it," I laughed. "Why would Max do that?" Her smile faded. "Because he doesn't like sleeping alone." I felt something cold settle in my chest. The first warning. One evening, Emily and I were cleaning up after dinner when we heard a loud crash from upstairs. We ran to Sophie's room. She was standing frozen, staring at her bookshelf. The entire thing had toppled over, books scattered everywhere. "Sophie, are you okay?" Emily rushed to her. Sophie just nodded, her face pale. "What happened?" I asked. Her lip trembled. "Max got mad." "Mad?" I repeated. She wouldn't say anything else. That night, I woke up to the sound of whispers. It was Sophie, but her voice was different, soft, strained, like she was having a conversation. I crept to her room. The door was slightly open. Inside, Sophie was sitting upright in bed, speaking in a hushed tone. There was no one else there. "Sweetheart," I whispered. She snapped her head toward me, startled. "Go back to bed, Daddy," she said. I swallowed hard. "Who were you talking to?" Her gaze darkened. "Max says you shouldn't ask questions." A shiver crawled up my spine. Something in the closet. One night, Sophie ran into our bedroom, shaking. "Daddy, he's in my closet." I sat up instantly. "Who is?" She clung to me. "Max, he's mad at me." I grabbed a flashlight and stormed into her room. I threw open the closet door. Nothing, just old coats and toys. Emily walked in behind me, rubbing her eyes. "Sophie, there's no one here." Sophie shook her head violently. "He's hiding. He doesn't like grown-ups." Emily sighed. "Sweetheart, you probably just had a bad dream." But Sophie was adamant. She refused to sleep in her room that night. And for the first time, I started to believe her. The photos. A few days later, Emily suggested we take a family photo in the backyard. We set up the camera on a tripod. It was a perfect shot. Emily and I smiling, Sophie between us, arms wrapped around our waists. Later that night, I scrolled through the pictures. That's when I saw it. In the window behind us, pressed against the glass, was a small, pale face, mouth open, black, hollow eyes. I felt my stomach drop. I zoomed in. It was a child, standing in Sophie's bedroom window. But I knew one thing for certain. We were home alone. The truth, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I started digging into the house's history. and what I found horrified me. In 1978, a little boy named Max Carter went missing. He had lived in our house. They found his body 3 years later. Inside the walls, tears burned my eyes as I scrolled through the newspaper article. Max had been abused, locked in his closet for days at a time, until one day he never came out. His parents buried him inside the house, and now he was still here. The last night I ran to Sophie's room. She was sitting on the bed, hugging her knees. "Sophie," I gasped, "we need to leave." She looked up slowly, and my heart stopped. Her eyes were pitch black. A sickly grin curled on her lips. "Max says you shouldn't have looked him up." The air grew ice cold. Sophie let out a small giggle, and in the closet behind her, I heard breathing. The escape, I grabbed Sophie and ran. Emily met us at the stairs, confusion on her face. "What's going on?" I didn't have time to explain. "We need to go. Now." As we rushed out the front door, the house shook violently. The windows rattled, and then a voice whispered from the darkness, "Don't leave me alone again." Then the front door slammed shut. Aftermath. We never went back. The house was abandoned, and a month later, it burned to the ground. No one knows how the fire started, but sometimes I wonder. Maybe Max wasn't looking for a friend. Maybe he was looking for a way out, and we were his last chance. A strange childhood. I grew up in a strict Catholic household, the kind where demons weren't just myths, but a certainty. My father was a deacon, my mother a devout believer. Every Sunday, every prayer, every rule, they followed to the letter. But faith didn't protect us. If anything, it made us more vulnerable. My mother used to say, "God hears your prayers, but so does something else." As a child, I didn't understand what she meant. Not until the night everything changed. The first sign. It started when I was 8 years old. I woke up in the middle of the night, cold sweat clinging to my skin. The house was too quiet. No creaking pipes, no wind against the windows. Just an unnatural silence. Then I saw her. My mother, standing in my bedroom doorway. She wasn't moving, not blinking, not breathing, just staring. A chill ran through me. "Mom?" I whispered. No response. I sat up, my small hands gripping the blanket. "Mom?" Slowly, she tilted her head. Her neck bent too far, like her bones weren't solid anymore. "He's watching," she whispered. I screamed. Dad came rushing in, flipping the light on. And she was gone. But her footsteps echoed down the hall, fading into the darkness. The stranger in my mother's skin. By morning, she was normal again, smiling, cooking breakfast, humming a hymn. I asked her about last night. She laughed. "I never went into your room, sweetheart." Dad nodded. "Maybe you had a nightmare." I wanted to believe them, but then it happened again, and again, and again. Every few nights, I'd wake up to find her in my doorway, sometimes whispering, sometimes just watching. And each time when morning came, she'd act as if nothing happened. By the time I was 10, I stopped sleeping altogether. The other voice one night, I locked my door. I thought it would help. But at 3:14 a.m., I woke up to the sound of someone scratching at the wood. A slow, deliberate scraping. Then a whisper. But it wasn't her voice. It was deeper, distorted, as if something else was speaking through her. "Let me in." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would stop. It didn't. The next morning, my mother was in the kitchen as usual. But when I looked at her, really looked at her, I realized something. Her eyes weren't the same. They used to be soft, warm brown. Now they were dull, lifeless, like glass, like whatever made her my mother wasn't there anymore. The snake. By the time I was a teenager, I had accepted it. Something was wrong with her, but no one else saw it. Dad refused to acknowledge it. The priest dismissed it as stress. Friends never noticed. Then came the snake. It was a cold November night. I was outside getting firewood when I heard her laughing. A low, eerie giggle. I turned the corner and froze. She was kneeling in the dirt, gripping a huge black snake with her bare hands. Her eyes were wild, her smile stretched too wide. "Look," she whispered, holding it up. I took a step back. "Mom, stop!" She just stared at me, as if she didn't even recognize me. Then, without hesitation, she bit into it. Her teeth sank into its flesh, blood dripping down her chin. I ran. I locked myself in my room and didn't come out until sunrise. By then, she was normal again, making pancakes, humming, like nothing happened. The blood on the wall. The last time I saw her like herself was the night before my 18th birthday. We had a small dinner. She hugged me, told me she was proud, and then at 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound that made my skin crawl, scraping. But this time, it wasn't at my door. It was coming from the walls. I grabbed my flashlight, shaking. Slowly, I opened my bedroom door and stopped cold. There, in the hallway, was my mother, scratching the walls with her fingernails. The wood was split, torn. Her fingers were bleeding, raw. And then she turned to me. Her mouth curled into a smile too wide for her face. "He's here." I slammed the door. The scratching continued. Until morning. The final night, I was done. I packed a bag and waited until Dad left for work. Then I went to say goodbye. I found her in the living room, sitting completely still, staring at nothing. "Mom," I said, "I'm leaving." No reaction. I turned to go. Then she whispered, "He won't let you." I ran, made it to the door. Then blackness. The truth. I woke up in the basement, tied to a chair. She was standing in front of me. Not my mother anymore. Something else.
Her head twitched, her fingers curling unnaturally. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He loves you too." My blood ran cold. I struggled against the restraints. "Mom, please." She lunged, pressing her forehead against mine. And suddenly, I saw it. Something inside her, a shadow, a figure, twisting, writhing, smiling. I screamed. Then, darkness again. Aftermath. I woke up in the hospital. Dad said I was found unconscious on the front porch. The police called it a stress episode. Mom was gone, disappeared, no trace. They never found her. But I know the truth. She wasn't missing. She wasn't human anymore. She was his now. And some nights, when I close my eyes, I still hear the scratching at my door.
My daughter's strange sleepwalking. The first time I saw Ava sleepwalk, she was 6. I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps padding through the hallway. Half asleep, I assumed she was heading to the bathroom. But when I cracked open my door to check, I saw her, standing in the middle of the hallway completely still. Her tiny feet were shifting slightly, rocking back and forth. Her hands hung limply by her sides. And her eyes, they were open but not seeing. I called her name softly, no reaction. I stepped closer. "Ava, sweetheart, let's get you back to bed." Still, she didn't move. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her breath slow and rhythmic, as if she was waiting for something. Then, just as I reached for her hand, she turned and walked away, not towards her room, but straight to the corner of the hallway. A dead end. And she stopped. My skin prickled. "Ava," I whispered. She lifted her hand and pressed it against the wall. Her fingers trembled slightly, moving as if tracing something unseen. That was when I realized she was whispering. Her lips barely moved, forming soft, soundless words. I leaned in closer, trying to hear. And then, just like that, she turned around and walked back to her bed. Like nothing had happened. The next morning, she had no memory of it. The murmuring at midnight Ava's sleepwalking happened more often after that. Always the same. She'd walk into the hallway, press her hand to the wall, and whisper things too soft for me to understand. At first, I thought it was just a phase. I read that kids sometimes did this, that it was harmless. But it didn't feel harmless, especially when I started waking up to other things. Some nights I'd hear tapping sounds, soft rhythmic knocks against the wall, just outside my bedroom. Other nights I'd wake up feeling like someone was watching me, only to find Ava standing there, silent, staring just past me into the darkness. One time I woke up to her standing by the window, her hand pressed against the glass, whispering again. This time I caught a few words. It wasn't English. It wasn't anything I recognized. I put my hands on her shoulders. She was ice cold. When I shook her, she gasped, like she was drowning. Then she blinked at me, dazed, confused. "Mom?" she mumbled. She had no memory of being at the window, no memory of the words. And then, things got worse. The shadow in the mirror. One night I heard laughing. It was coming from Ava's room. Not loud, not playful, software secretive. Like she was talking to someone. I pushed open her door, my stomach tightening. She was sitting on the floor, her back to me, facing her bedroom mirror. Her hands were placed flat against the glass. And she was whispering. "Ava," I called, my voice shaking. She didn't react. I moved closer, and suddenly she turned her head sharply, not to me, to her reflection. And then she smiled, a slow, sleepy, unsettling smile. I grabbed her and pulled her away from the mirror. She gasped again, that same drowning sound. She blinked up at me, confused. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice groggy. "You were talking in your sleep," I said. She frowned. "No, I wasn't." She had no memory of it. That night, I covered the mirror. The next day, I started looking for answers. The history of the house. I dug through old property records, trying to distract myself from the unease curling in my chest. Then I found something. Our house was built over 150 years ago. The first owners, a small family, a father, a mother, and their little girl. The little girl died in her sleep. The records didn't say how, just that she was found in her bed one morning, cold and lifeless, with no signs of illness. But the strangest part? A journal entry from the father found years later. She keeps walking at night, staring at the walls, pressing her hands against them, whispers things I can't understand, like she's listening to something I can't hear. My breath hitched. A little girl, pressing her hands to the walls, whispering, just like Ava, the door in the wall. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ava standing there in the hallway, whispering to the walls. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up, and I heard it. Soft knocking, coming from the hallway. I grabbed my phone, heart hammering, and stepped out. Ava was there, standing against the wall, knocking. I turned on my flashlight and froze. The wallpaper, it looked different, like the pattern was shifting, curling at the edges, revealing something underneath. My hands trembled as I reached out and started peeling it back. The moment I did, Ava gasped behind me. I turned. She was staring at the wall, eyes wide. Her lips moved, whispering, and then she collapsed. I caught her just before she hit the floor, and behind her, the wallpaper had peeled away, revealing a hidden door. The room, behind the wall. The door was old, small, locked tight. I had to pry it open. Inside was a tiny, forgotten room, dust-covered, cold, and in the center, A child's bed. I felt sick. But the worst part, on the walls, there were handprints, faint, small, as if someone had pressed their hands against the wall over and over again. Just like Ava. The final night, I got rid of the mirror. I sealed the hidden room. I even had the house blessed. And after that, Ava's sleepwalking stopped. The whispers, gone. The knocking, silence. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I swear I still hear it. A soft tapping from inside the walls, like someone is still trying to get through, trying to find their way back, trying to reach us. And I pray that it never does.